of you here this morning on this Thanksgiving Day weekend. Rachel and the girls and I want to express our thanksgiving, our appreciation to each of you individually, to each family, and the congregation here. You have accepted us as a member of your own, and you have treated us with great love and appreciation, and we are thankful for that. These elders I have enjoyed working with. They are among the easiest men to work. I've had the pleasure of working with them, and they've always treated me as a gospel preacher with love and with grace and deference. These deacons love the church. It is encouraging to be around them and to hear them talk, to lay out plans, to see the church grow and to see the gospel spread. And I've enjoyed working with them. And so we will ask that you keep us in your prayers as we will keep you in our prayers. And we will carry you in our hearts wherever providence might guide us. And know that we will pull for the Wildcats on the basketball court wherever we go. Let's get into our lesson this morning. We have been studying the life of Christ from the Gospel of Luke this year. Luke was a Gentile who left paganism, left idolatry, to become a child of God through Jesus Christ. But Luke was a medical doctor, and so Luke was not a pushover. Luke was not gullible. He was a trained scientist. And so when Luke was in the process of becoming a Christian, maybe after he already became a Christian, he decided to go back and research Christianity. He traveled and he talked to eyewitnesses in order to establish the truth about what he had heard. And he had a friend named Theophilus, and Theophilus also became a Christian, and so Luke writes his gospel to Theophilus. And he says, chapter 1, beginning in verse 1, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile an account of those things that were accomplished among us, which were handed down to us through our witnesses and servants of the word, it seemed fitting to me as well, having investigated everything carefully from the beginning, to write out to you, most excellent Theophilus, in consecutive order, that you might know the exact truth of those things you have been taught." And so this year we have approached the Gospel of Luke from the same position Luke did, or Theophilus. What is it in this Gospel that grabs our attention? What is it in the life of Christ that directs our lives to heaven? And this last day of the month, we come to the last chapter of Luke. Luke chapter 24. If you're reading the Bible out of the pew, page 884. Walking with the risen Christ. There are events that happen in our lives that change our direction and focus. For those of us who are married, it may have been the time we saw our spouse for the very first time. But surely when we said "I do," it changed the direction of our lives. From that moment on, it is no longer history of the Day of Infamy written by Walter Lord about a week or so ago. For those who were there, and for citizens who were old enough to remember, it changed our country. And most recently, in the lives of those of us who are younger, 9/11. And I've recently this year read George W. Bush's autobiography, Decision Points, and he talks about the fact that that day changed his presidency. And it changed our country. In some ways good, in some ways maybe not so good. But it was an event that changed our direction and changed our focus. And the resurrection of Christ, even though it happened 2,000 years ago, is an event that changes our lives. And when we come to accept that, and we come to appreciate that, it changes how we live our lives. And that's the message that I want to emphasize to us this morning. Luke chapter 24. And as we read through this text, here's what I want us to do. First of all, I want us to look at 5 reasons in the text why we know that Jesus rose from the dead. Because our faith is established on that fact. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, nothing really matters. But if Jesus did rise from the dead, and Luke gives us 5 reasons why we can know Jesus rose from the dead. If he did rise from the dead, nothing else really is important except our response to that resurrection. And then I want us to conclude the lesson by pointing out 5 reasons why the resurrection is important for us. It's not just an event that happened in Rome and in Jerusalem in the first century and has no further application to us. But the New Testament teaches that living in the United States of America in the 21st century, it still has relevance to us. So let's look at the text. Very, very early on the first day of the week, these ladies come to finish preparing the body of Jesus for his, what they thought, permanent burial. But the first reason we know why Jesus rose from the dead is in verse 3. When they entered the tomb, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. The body was gone. Now, some skeptics today will say, well, probably the women just went to the wrong tomb. And those would be the same people who mock Christianity for not letting women serve in leadership positions because they say that's misogynistic. You hate women if you don't let women. They're the ones that say these women were so disoriented psychologically and emotionally, they went to the wrong tomb. Mark chapter 15, the very last verse in that chapter, the God of heaven, let me and you know that the women went to the right tomb. Because just before they left the tomb on that fateful Friday evening, they took note of the grave where Jesus was laid. They went to the right tomb. The tomb was empty. Now, you remember in Matthew chapter 28 that the soldiers will go to the Jewish leaders and they'll say, Jesus rose from the dead. And the Jewish leaders will give them money and say, don't say it's Jesus rose from the dead. That will destroy what we accomplished to this far. You tell people that his body was stolen by the disciples. The women didn't steal the body. Why did they go early on the first day of the week in order to anoint the body if they're the ones that stole the body to begin with? But now, second reason why we know Jesus rose from the dead is that God, through his angels, tells us so. The angels appear to the women, and with so many other things, in fact, every other thing that is of spiritual significance, in order for us to understand, we've got to have God's help. How do we understand spiritual things? How do you understand the empty tomb? God sent his messengers from heaven in verse 6 to tell the women, here's the significance of the empty tomb. He is not here, but he is risen. The message from heaven is not that the disciples stole the body, and it's not that the enemy stole the body. The message from heaven is He's alive. And you don't keep live bodies in dead tombs. The angels of God tell us that Jesus rose from the dead. And that's how we know that it is the truth. And so the ladies are all excited. They're still not comprehending exactly what's going on. But they run to the apostles, and they tell the apostles in verse 10, the tomb is empty. And the third reason why we know that Jesus rose from the dead is that the apostles didn't believe him. Now, incidentally, relative to what skeptics like to say about religion, here's the reason why we know that the Bible is from God. Because in the first century, women had no credibility in the court of law. You would not call a woman into a courtroom in the first century to give her testimony because they were considered unreliable. The God of heaven believed that the women were reliable because Jesus appeared to women first. You see, man writing without the help of the Holy Spirit could not say that. He could not make that up. And so women were the first eyewitnesses of the resurrected Christ, and they come to the apostles, and the apostles do not believe them, verse 11. These words appear to them as nonsense, and they would not believe them. The idea was so preposterous in the eyes of the apostles. So this third argument for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the fact that the apostles were hard to convince. I've had some people I've studied the Bible with that were hard nuts to crack. You know, get them to realize the error of their way and accept what the Bible teaches. But once you get those people convinced, once you crack that nut and you convince them of the truth of the gospel, you won't convince them anything else. They are convicted in their hearts, and that's what happens to the apostles. They get up and run, and Peter gets up and he runs to the tomb, verse 12. And John will tell us in John chapter 20 that John went there also. Here, Luke just focuses on Peter. But Peter goes into the tomb and stooping, looking in, he sees the linen wrappings only. Evidence number 4 for the resurrection of Christ. If anybody steals a dead body, they're not going to stop and take time to take the wrappings off the body. You're not going to be caught running around with a naked dead body on your shoulder. His funeral garments were left behind. Why? Because you don't wrap a living body in funeral garments. And again, John writes in John chapter 20 that the head turban was left neatly folded. You see, the evidence does not support the idea that anybody stole the body of Jesus. Or that Jesus himself was somehow revived, and he never really died. He was just revived and he walked out on his own. All the evidence supports the conviction that Jesus rose from the dead. The linen wrappings only. Peter goes on marveling at what had happened. You see, he still did not fathom what the resurrection was all about. We're going to come back to evidence number 5. But let's talk about this trip on the road to Emmaus. That very same day, Sunday afternoon, these two disciples are walking to Emmaus, which is about 7 miles from Jerusalem, verse 13. 7 miles. That's about from here to the county line, isn't it? Bourbon-Fayette County line. Roughly 7 miles. If the average man walks about 3 miles an hour, then this is going to be about a 2-hour trip. And it doesn't take them 2 hours to get back to Jerusalem. So they're out there walking, they're discussing what is going on, and Jesus appears to them, verse 15, traveling with them, and somehow or another their eyes are